Hi, welcome everybody. We're seeing the numbers pile up and all the people behind them. So we're so excited that you're here to join us today. We'll give everybody some time to pop in. Hi, Haley. Hi, James. Good to see you. Hi, Kristen and Lakeisha. Oh, Latoya. Very good to see you. Latoya from here in Nashville, checking out all these folks. Hi, Maria and Laura. Hi, very good to see you, Marc. Marnie. Let's skip on down the alphabet. Who do we got? Hi, Dan and David and Emma. Thank you so much for joining, everyone. We'll give folks a couple minutes to pop in. I see Taluna. Hey, Taluna. It's super good to see you. Hi, Wendy. So everybody can put in the chat your name and the school or district that you're representing or the organization that you're here for. We would love to learn a little bit about who all's here and let you guys see each other. Hi, Jose. Hi, Erica and George. Let us know who we've got joining today. This is awesome. We've got Shannon from Fort Worth. We've got Boston Public Schools represented, Hampshire, Illinois. This is super great. Maria from Rockwood, it's so good to see you. Jennifer from Memphis, Tennessee. Stella from Spencer. Hi, Stella. Jose is from McAllen. I'm a Texan as well. Gotta love the Texans. Shani too. Naomi from Cincinnati Public Schools. Hi, Antonio from Atlanta Public Schools. We've got Marc from KIPP St. Louis. So good to see you again, Marc. Hi, Darlene. Brett from North Carolina. Someone from Austin Achieves Public Schools. Very good to see you. How exciting. Thank you so much, everybody. So we've got with us over 100 people now, and we're still continuing to welcome in some folks, but I'll go ahead and get us started as people join. And please continue to introduce yourself in the chat if you haven't had a chance to do so. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm Caitlin Churchill. I am Possip's Director of Community and your moderator today. Thank you so much for giving me that opportunity. And we're here to talk about ideas for improving and increasing attendance and enrollment. You are likely already aware of the problem of waning attendance. You may even feel this problem personally. Let's pause for a moment and think about that. Has dropping attendance in schools had an implication on your job or your work culture? Have you known students who have struggled with attendance? Maybe you've witnessed absences impact a student's academic progress or their sense of belonging. Have you seen the strength of a classroom, a school, or a community that you love minimized because people aren't showing up? There are some hard numbers around absenteeism, and these are surfaced by Attendance Works. It's a national nonprofit initiative, and they show us that chronic absences have doubled since the pandemic, impacting upwards 16 million students. Many of these absences, especially among our youngest students, are technically excused for health reasons. Children living in poverty are 2 to 3 times more likely to be chronically absent. And we see that public school enrollment is down by more than 1 million. Very practically, this is all about lost learning time, and chronic absences accumulate to some students missing a month of school each year, which of course over years becomes so much more time that they've missed at school. However, here at Possip, we look for hope, and there is hope even in this attendance work data. They're showing us that chronic absence is a solvable problem. They've stated that what works is taking a data-driven, comprehensive approach that begins with engaging students and families, as well as preventing absences from adding up before people fall behind academically. So the key is using chronic absent data as a diagnostic tool to identify where prevention and early intervention are needed. I know that's a long quote, so I'm going to pause to make sure that that lands. Attendance Works data is telling us to engage families, intervene early, and stay vigilant by using diagnostic tools. You were invited here by Possip, and Possip wants to help with this. Pulse checks are a way to engage all families often and learn about their needs early on. With routine feedback, you can notice a potential barrier like transportation or health or other barriers that we'll talk about today when it first arises for a family before it becomes a chronic absence. So what are pulse checks? Simply a routine check-in. We send it by text message in the preferred language of families. And in 1 minute, the pulse check is able to ask thousands of families, are you happy in school this week? Do you have praise? Do you have needs? And these texts are done in an automated way with an automated cadence. And within a few days of each one, school principals get a report surfacing praise for their staff, what's going well, follow-up that's needed, and trends that are emerging over time. Districts also get to see what's happening across their district comparatively, school by school. So pulse checks are a tactic for engaging families often and for learning about general needs early, just what attendance data tells us that we need to do. We also have something called attendance checks, and that's a companion tool. With attendance checks, you can target engagement with chronically absent families specifically, learning about their direct and specific barriers to missing school. Here's how attendance pulse checks work. Very similarly, every week a text goes to parents of chronically absent students to learn their barriers to attendance. These messages go out in the preferred language of the family, and our data is showing us that 45% of the incoming messages are from non-English speaking families. So a great tool for equity here as well. Schools are receiving reports of each family's barriers and needs on an individual family basis, and it helps to reduce the workload of intervention that's being done by school teams. So just keep this in your back pocket. We're going to talk about this tactic and many, many other tactics as we talk today. And these are ways for engaging families and intervening early, which we know are pillars to improving attendance. Awesome. What have we learned from those attendance checks? We know that overall the barriers to attendance have remained largely the same since 2019, which might be surprising to some of us. In 4 years of surveying over 7,000 families, our data from the attendance check specifically shows that sickness persists as the top barrier, ranging from half to the majority of all absences. Transportation is the second top barrier, averaging about 10% of absences. And then there are other logistical barriers like traffic and scheduling conflicts. We've learned that 40% of families have a barrier to attendance, 40% of all families. And that transportation is a big barrier for Title I designated schools and high schools. What is interesting is when we ask families what would help with attendance and ensuring that their child is there every single day, they tell us that a support person or mentor would help, as well as extracurricular activities. When we look at the barriers across all of the categories, these are the ones that emerge. Logistical, that's transportation and balancing childcare and schedules. Families also face communication barriers. This could be language barriers, very simply, or sometimes it's just the sending and receiving of conflicting information. We see that there are health barriers and safety barriers. Those health barriers do include mental health and a perception of the health of a school environment. And the safety barriers are, of course, what we might expect, but I love just being reminded of a quote from our last event that we did on safety, when a school counselor said to us very simply, if kids don't feel safe, they're not coming to school. We also see in our data and our feedback from families that sometimes differing mindsets become a barrier, which just means people have different ideas about the importance of attending school and the value of the time that's spent in class. So those are tough barriers, but we're here to remember that chronic absence is a solvable problem. That's the conversation that we're going to get into here soon. And we want to take a moment before doing that to ask the audience to weigh in. So we're about to launch a poll. You'll see it pop up on your screen. Yes, perfect. And the question here is before you. What do you believe is the most solvable barrier for families facing chronic absences? Transportation, conflicting information, or expectations? Health and sickness, safety concerns, or other? And you can see the numbers rolling in from 150 folks or so. Interesting. Conflicting information or expectations taking the lead. People also seeing transportation as a solvable barrier. We'll give it a few more minutes to let folks continue on to see where these numbers land. Great. So I'll go ahead and start to summarize because likely the direction will stay the same. But essentially sharing the results here, we can see that transportation, about 32% of folks believe this is solvable, whereas a majority of folks are believing that we have the ability to solve conflicting information or expectations, so communications. And then, of course, some folks are still feeling that there's some solvable tactics out there for health and safety, which we agree. So we'll get into that as well. Thank you so much for participating in that poll. In just a moment, we're going to engage our panel. I'm really excited to introduce you to these people. And we're going to have that panel talk about a framework for improving attendance. After that conversation, we'll summarize some tactics for improving attendance and enrollment. And first, we just want to set the scene with the framework that we'll discuss with the panel. We know that there are 4 areas within this framework that help with solving attendance and encouraging solving absenteeism and encouraging attendance. Engaging and understanding barriers to attendance. We've talked about ways to do that. Removing barriers to attendance, using communication tactics like early outreach and building a culture of attendance, and staying aligned with clear requirements and vigilant data. So let's go ahead and get into the conversation, which I know we're all looking forward to. I have the honor of introducing our panel, and then we'll spotlight them so you can see their beautiful faces. Our first honored guest is, of course, you, our audience. We wish that we could see all of your faces. Thank you for letting me call out some of your names, and we would love to hear all of your voices. But since there are over 100 of you, we encourage you to engage with the chat. So write in any questions that you have for the panel. My colleague Lauren is watching for your questions, and we'll incorporate them into the conversation. I'm pleased to introduce you to James Crumlin. That's the first photo here. He is a lawyer at Spencer Fane and a triathlete. He's competed in over 8 Ironmans, which is crazy awesome. And he leads Nashville's Capital Steps workout every week. This is voted Nashville's best free community workout. James is joining the conversation to talk about motivating people to do hard things. We also have Austin Rhodes. Austin is an education innovator and a communications consultant with a simple goal: to create a positive narrative about education. His company, which is a family company, Rhodes Branding, helps schools develop communication strategies for increasing attendance and enrollment, and he'll bring that expertise to today's conversation. We have Shani Dowell, my friend, our CEO, a founder of Possip, and a former math teacher. She is also a Possip parent herself, meaning she takes those pulse checks every week. And Shani joins the conversations to elevate the family experience, to speak for and advocate for the trends that come through in our family feedback. And then we have our dream team, Dr. Kavon, Seay, Dean of Students, and Marc Anthony Peak, Community Achieve Site Manager. And they're both at Napier Elementary in Nashville, Tennessee, which is where we're located. And Marc and Kavon will share community-centered approaches to helping students love coming to school. So as we have this conversation, I'm encouraging all of you in our audience to take notes on tactics that are interesting to you. What do you think would be helpful for improving attendance and enrollment? After this conversation, we'll summarize these and we'll ask for your input. All right, Lauren, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we can spotlight our beautiful panel. So we'll get that organized and we'll go ahead and kick off some questions for our panel. The very first question is for Shani. Shani, I would love to ask you to kick us off by letting us know a little bit about what we've understood about the barriers to attendance through pulse checks. What are families saying?
Yeah, and Caitlin, thank you so much for having us and hosting. One of the things I reflected on as I was thinking about this panel and what might be unique, what we hope that you get that's unique about this is there's a lot of information, and what we'll share is sharing back a lot of that information, but the lens through what we hear from parents and is unique. And so Caitlin, you share the barriers, health and sickness, transportation, but I want to dig under those a little bit more. I say there are three things that really pop out that we hear from parents. And like you mentioned, these are things we've heard from before the pandemic started. So I think that's what's helpful, because it's so hard to disentangle sometimes. Are these things because of the pandemic or not? And so much of this was present before the pandemic. The first is alignment. And I saw one of the top poll that the audience thought was kind of shared expectations. So the first is definitely around alignment. The second is really around networks and supports for parents. We know that so many parents, even of means, are on a fragile kind of net. And so I'm making sure that parents have networks and supports. And the third is just mattering and being seen. So knowing that them being at the school matters. So forgive me, I'm going to talk a little bit long, but then I'll be quiet. On alignment, like I said, before the pandemic, we heard from parents, misalignment between parents and schools. And I think often as we think about how we communicate with parents around attendance from a teacher or a staff or district mindset, we do it in a compliance mindset. And so we have to really get away from a compliance mindset around attendance to a community mindset around attendance. Because what we hear from parents is that the tone of attendance follow-ups is often distancing for them. It feels punitive. They feel punished and talked down to. And part of why that probably happens is because districts and schools spend so much time thinking about attendance. You feel so much pressure from the state or federal government for funding, for kind of the status of your school. And so that attendance, that stress gets pushed down to parents, as opposed to the alternative, which is why it would matter for a parent or a student to show up to school. So I think parents really need to hear with a different tone and approach. Also on alignment, I think one of the challenges we all deal with now is we spent 2 to 3 years telling people during the pandemic, if you have even a hint of sickness, stay home. And so now we're needing to consider some different messaging. So parents tell us they're confused. Should they send their child? Should they not send their child? And so really getting clear on your expectations for families and why you have those expectations is super helpful. The second is around networks and supports. So Caitlin, like you shared, sickness, transportation, they're really big barriers. And so how can we help parents have networks and supports? We have some resources that I'll share in a link that can help parents think about and plan at the beginning of the year before they necessarily need to use those resources. But how do we help them build out their networks and supports so that, if they get sick, so, you talk about sickness, sometimes it's not even that the student is sick, it's that the parent is sick. How can their child still get to school? And the third is, again, just mattering and being seen. So today I was at my kid's school, and if my son's principal is out here, shout out to Caitlin Talley, his principal. But I said to her, hey, it's a good thing you're smiling. That's great. She said, I make sure to put a smile on my face every morning. So that's super important. We hear from parents and students just how much mattering and being seen matters. And so, you come to a place where you matter, and you come to a place that matters to you. And so that's really the third kind of underlying theme for across all of those different barriers. to me.
Yeah, that's great. What really stood out to me is kind of that tone and approach. And I see all kinds of experiences in my life where tone really matters and the tone that you get to create, a welcoming environment, all of those types of things. So, Austin, as a communications consultant, I would love to hear you kind of comment a little bit about that tone and approach. And what are some tips that you consult schools on around the importance of attending school, on creating that tone that's helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I think what Shani said, just echo the compliance tone. I mean, we live in 2023. Every year we get more and more rules and regulations we have to live by. Sometimes you become numb to that if you're quote unquote in the system. We have to remember that the way these parents and these young people, what they're exposed to every day on TV and the normal media, it doesn't have that compliance tone. So it's really about kind of peeling those layers back and being more human. And the good thing is that's easy for educators. Sometimes though, you can lose sight of that because you live in that compliance world. So it's a reminder for a lot of our clients to really just check and have, little committees together of students. So yeah, echo Shani on that point about compliance.
Yeah. So taking that into the school environment, Dr. Seay, Marc Anthony, what are some ways that you help to create that tone of, coming to school is important and you can love it and there's a smile on your face? Would love to hear what you think. Let's see, maybe Dr. Seay, and then we'll go Marc Anthony if you have anything to add.
Yeah, so one way that we create that tone is, again, we are big at Napier about just that relationship building with our families from day one, right? And so that they feel a part of Napier. And so one way, instead of using it as a compliance piece, we really come through with that caring piece that we want to see your child at school and how important it is that your child is here, because it's something that we enjoy seeing your child here. We enjoy their energy at school. And so we tackle it in that way, just making sure that our kids and our families feel that connection to school. And then I'll let Marc jump in.
So echoing those sentiments, we also prepare the staff and administration before the students even arrive. We have a mindset here. We're not just serving the students, but we're serving families. We have the fortunate opportunity to be a community school. The majority of our students literally live 2 blocks away from the school. So we're constantly engaging not only the students, but also the families and the communities. So that's one piece that's extremely important for us in regards to coming to school. So for like example, we have an enrollment campaign that we're rolling out this year. We're talking about come on back home, right? That's the campaign, because a lot of the students, they live in this community, but some of them are being taken outside of the community to go to other schools for various reasons. And as we had articulated earlier, we noticed that transportation is a barrier, but with our school, it's not a barrier. You can walk down the street and come to school. So preparing the mindset of the faculty and staff is a huge part of it, so that everyone knows that students need to be seen once they're here, and we also need to be visible in that loving way. So those are some ways in which we make sure to galvanize the concept that school is a loving and a safe place for students to attend.
That's really interesting. Austin, I'm going to go off script with a question that you maybe weren't prepared with, which is just interesting as Marc talks about preparing both students and staff. When you're consulting schools, how are you talking to staff about their responsibilities, about their mindsets, and how that impacts families?
I mean, it starts at the top. So a lot of times we get asked to consult and work with school boards and superintendents and principals behind the scenes. The ones that get it, it's a matter of really packaging what they're trying to get out in a way that they can own it. I mean, come on back home, like Marc just said, that's a campaign. You need everyone to be talking about come back home and the 3 talking points of what is important about that campaign. So it's really just unifying in staff meetings that you're already having. What are those bullet points? What are we trying to really get across, so that everyone's speaking the same language? It's what big corporations do. It's what a lot of higher ed institutions do. And you're seeing this really infiltrating the K-12 space. So it's exciting.
So I love that around this campaign, Come On Back Home, this enrollment campaign. I'm curious, Marc, Anthony, are there any campaigns or particular tactics that you guys are taking to address sickness? We know that that is a more difficult barrier to address, at least judging by what our audience said. So what are some of the approaches or campaigns that you've used in removing those kinds of barriers related to health?
So it's been a variety. As the community chief site manager, I have the joy and the privilege of organizing community events for the school. So we have, like, every month we have a literacy or a numeracy night. And during those times, we have healthcare providers to come in to either offer information or to offer some type of vaccination as well for families who want to take advantage of that. We're also very informative with the families. We have a social media team. As a matter of fact, Dr. Seay and I are two members of the social media crew. We have another one, brother by the name of Michael Atkins, who's a part of that team. So we're making sure to communicate with them about ways that you can stay healthy during different seasons, or ways you can stay healthy when school is not in. We're also communicating with families the misinformation piece. We're letting them know, as opposed to, diagnosing your child with the flu as soon as they wake up, why don't you send them on into school? Because we have a nurse here in-house, so that when they get to school, we can have the nurse to take a look at them, and so they can get accounted for coming to school, and also be excused if they need to leave school because the nurse has determined that they're not safe to be in the school environment. So we're able to do that as far as dealing with the health concerns. Also, we're really big on keeping things clean around here. We're really big. It's an elementary school, so we're constantly reaffirming the ideas of washing your hands after you're using the restroom. Also, we have shared leadership responsibilities, like in the cafeteria, for them to clean up the tables. I mean, we could run the gambit about the ways that are organic here that we use to deal with students not missing school because of health challenges. And Dr. Seay, I'm sure you can speak to some other methods that we're using as well.
Well, one other thing I want to add in is that, again, we're fortunate that we are truly a community school, and so most of our families and students live in the community. We have a United Health community that is housed inside of the community, so parents have that access to go there right in the community. They can just walk right to that building, and there is care provided for the families as well.
This is really neat. I mean, a lot of the tactics that you are surfacing again and again, Marc, Anthony, and Dr. Seay, are that community-centered tactic. You kind of commented a little bit on your solution with transportation being community-centered too. I'd love to take a moment just to hear you talk a little bit about your walking school bus, and then we'll move on to some other questions around community-centered efforts.
Okay, gladly. So collaborative leadership. So I'm going to talk about the walking school bus. I'm the individual who's like the face of the walking school bus, but I'm a representative of a large group of people that have come together to make it so that we can find a solution to this challenge. Initially, the executive director, David Kovach, had presented to the principal, Whitney Russell, that she would to approach me about spearheading the walking school bus. And this is an initiative. It's not something that we're being innovative. This is something that we're expounding on, right? It's a model where teachers, parents, community members come together and they walk with students to school in the morning to remove some of the barriers for transportation. Some families, because we're in elementary school and we have pre-K up into 5th grade, so some families have safety concerns for their children walking to school in the morning. Everything from getting into adverse conversations with other peers, or cars coming by, and we only have one crossing guard because of the amount of students that walk to school. So that's one of the ways that we have created a solution to transportation. So we meet at some local spots within the community, and we walk every morning. Monday and Wednesday, rain or rain, snow, it doesn't matter the weather conditions, we're walking them to school. And we also have an incentive programs attached to it called Tiger Bucks, which is our PBIS incentive program. So not only are we removing barriers to transportation, but we're simultaneously promoting positive behavior within our school as well. So that has been an absolutely huge success. And because of our principal recognizing some of the trends in data, we've been able to connect not only our walking school bus for for attendance, but also we've been able to connect that to the PBIS parties that we have on the day that we recognize that we have the largest absences, which is the day right before we go on long breaks or the days after we come back from long breaks. So we've been able to make an interconnected solution to attendance, but it also addresses some of the other parts of our daily activities and curriculum to make it so that the students can not only access the school, but also make it so that it's a place they love to come and they feel safe and protected on their way here, as they're here, as well as on their way home.
That's super cool. I love that you really spoke about how you're leaning on data that around attendance. That reminds me when we had the safety event, we learned from the school counselor on the panel that the day after a school threat is when they have the lowest attendance. And so you can really capture, according to school events, according to things you're doing, what's the data say around attendance and how does that impact your efforts? That's a really neat example. So just kind of shifting a little bit over to James and staying with this community-centered conversation. James, I would love to hear a little bit from you about how you engage a community as large as Nashville, and how do you use campaigns or social media in order to help with those efforts? That's a big question.
Big question. Well, first, I want to thank you and Shani for allowing me to be a part of this. I'm humbled to be here, humbled to be in the presence of my other panelists. I'm just in awe of the things that you do for the schools and for the community at large. You know, for me, it's all about offering words of encouragement, offering humility, and building those up, or those people up around you, because you can't continue to have people won't come unless you're authentic or unless you're encouraging them. And I think that is the key. That's one of the reasons that we've been so successful at the Capitol Steps workout and just in the Nashville community at large, is because we offer a safe place, and we offer a place that you can be authentic and encouraging and make sure that nobody's judgmental, right? You don't want anybody to make any type of judgments about you, because no matter where you are on your journey, you've got to be in a place where you're offering some type of safe space. I always try to remain as humble as possible in all this. It's never about me. It's all about pouring into the souls of other people and encouraging them. I've got to be able to listen, make sure that you anticipate somebody's needs. If you're having kids that are having certain issues, you want to make sure that you're just listening to their needs and not really pouring what you want to pour on them, but understanding their place and where they are in their journey. You know, it's all about being selfless and not being selfish. So all of those things just really kind of some of the principles that I've developed over the years, just to try to inspire people, get people motivated, telling them that they can do hard things, because you just have to be, words of encouragement go so far, especially in an age where mental health is such a huge piece of everybody's journey. And we've got to have strong mental health. And some people, they're not where they need to be, and they need a community around us. People like all 5 of us, 6 of us on this chat, and the 176 of you in the audience, to be inspiring, to be inspirational, to offer words of encouragement to everybody involved.
Sorry, Caitlin, I love that come as you are. It kind of reminds me also of the come home. We were just talking the panel before the conversation, and I was talking about James's Capitol Steps workout, and there are a lot of steps. And so I told him, I said, I feel like I need to get into a certain kind of shape before I can come to to your workout. And he said, no, come just as you are. And I think that's so powerful for students, because I do think sometimes what holds family, and to your point about Marc Anthony, but before you go and diagnose your child, send them to school and then we'll figure it out. I just think that idea of removing barriers for what people think, how they need to show up is so important, because we do all get into our minds a lot about how we need to be or how we need to show up in a school building. And so I just think that's such an important message.
Yeah, and I welcome the rest of the panel to jump in too. If you feel inspired by something someone else has said, you can add on to it. Thank you for that, James. I can see that you've got that tone down. So I'm seeing a few questions that the audience is posing, and I want to make sure to honor some of those questions as well. So there's a question here around how do we engage and re-engage students in high school specifically when we know that they're dealing with employment and providing for their families. So that might be a question that we can approach more specifically or broadly. And I'll kind of open that up to anyone on the panel. Kind of a recognizing that students have barriers where they're caretakers as well. And how do we meet those needs?
I would like to chime in on that because I think it goes to, I mean, really, James, what you were talking about, the community having a part in this. I think we've gotten away from the community school aspect, and it's kind of, that's the school will handle that. You know, I have my 9 to 5 and that's the school's issue. We're all in this together. And I think that's kind of the part of it with struggling for these different students and where they are is finding what all is available in the community, and understanding that it is overwhelming how many different programs are out there. I mean, if you just do a quick Google search in any medium-sized city, there are all kinds of programs, but to someone who doesn't have the time to vet these out and have these conversations, there needs to be a way to aggregate what is available in these communities so that people have access that's easily accessible.
Yeah. I mean, you made me think, Austin, and the resource I put in the chat, we have a document there. We talked about helping parents plan and have supports, but I think about high school students, particularly who have jobs, they probably need a facilitated space also to sit down and plan and support. And starting with, that's amazing, you have a job, like what an incredible person you are to like both have a job and to be going to school. And let's help you plan out, how can we make them both work? Would you like, when do you know you have a schedule? When do you know you have like a late night shift? Like, what can we do? And so really, I think creating a space or carving out a space for students to actually plan is probably one of the things that comes to mind. And also honoring what they're doing by working and having a job. So it's again to the come as you are kind of theme.
Yeah, come as you are. That's also related to the efforts of Marc Anthony and Kavon, you know, meeting people where they are quite literally to bring them to school. And then we heard James talk about that. He's, you know, talking about the importance of anticipating needs by listening. We also hear a big need coming up in the chat that several folks do want us to comment on are related to tardies. So maybe I'll take this to the school group, but anyone can comment on it. And so people are just asking, what can we do to get kids to come to school on time? Or if we put that in James's context, you know, to get people to show up consistently. So the school folks, would you like to comment on that first, Dr. Seay, maybe?
Yes, I can. And Marc, feel free to jump in after. But one of the ways that we tackle the tardy issue, again, is just by making sure that we have that relationship built with our families, right? And so that they know the importance of showing up to school on time, right? Where the kids are able to eat breakfast, where we really are just breaking down, looking at the data to show like, hey, if your child is here on time, hey, you know, they can be started, set up for success. We want to see them so that they don't come in an hour later or 2 hours later. And so really just building and bridging that relationship with our families. And most of the time, again, some of our families just don't understand the importance, right? So I think COVID has impacted it as well, but that just understand the importance of why your kindergartner should be here, right, on time, or why your 5th grader should be here on time, right? Every second counts, every minute counts. So we really build that in with our families, but we build it in and we approach it with that relational approach. And so it's not a punitive approach, but it's more of that relationship of like why it's important. And so most of our families, they receive it. And then that issue, we tend to see a difference in the issue once that is explained directly to the parent. And so Marc, feel free to jump in if you have anything.
Yeah, so something So I'm going to rehash something I talked about earlier, just talking about the mindset of the faculty and staff is just such an important piece. So one of the beautiful things about working under the leadership of Whitney Russell is the collaborative leadership model that I talked about earlier. We make sure to spread the labor of attendance amongst 5 individuals, right, for each grade. So it gives each individual an opportunity to truly dig into the families to find out exactly what those barriers are, as well as any other ancillary information that may be valuable to make it so that, again, they feel like they're coming back home. Here at Napier Elementary School, we take the role of being a surrogate parent very seriously. And when we engage with our families and our students, we come from that area. Talking about the tone, the students here know that we are sincere in our actions, not just from checking in on them, but also we follow up with them, and we also reach out to their parents, right? One of the things that was so impressive to me when I first started working here at Napier is all the family trees that each teacher, family members, we have, the individuals that work in the cafeteria are related to teachers and students. I mean, the community here is a sincere community. So when we're talking about tardies, we've been able to decrease the number of tardies with our students for constantly articulating how important it is for students to come to school. Also, we miss you. We miss you and we want to see you in the morning times, and there are valuable things that are happening in the morning time. Also, we are Leader in Me School, so we're offering leadership opportunities in the morning for students. We're also offering, again, benefits with PBIS in the morning. So it's like the morning time is so valuable, but we're also communicating that that's a valuable time through our social media outlets, through the conversations that we're having, not just like, oh, we're going to send a letter home, or, oh, we're going to have this announcement. No, in the casual conversations that we're having, we're talking about these things that are important to Napier, as well as important to developing powerful students that are going to be leaders in the community.
This is so cool. I'm seeing a theme arise from all of you. I've heard James talk about authenticity. Marc Anthony, you just spoke about sincerity. You've talked about the caring piece. So I want to take it over to Austin to talk a little bit more about that, promoting positive behavior in the communications. And I'd love to just hear from you. How do you really meet your attendance goals, make sure you're communicating requirements, expectations, and all of that, but do it with that level of authenticity? How do you help schools to do that? And have you seen in your work that that's really going to make an impact here?
Long story short, yes, it will make an impact.
Thanks.
People are good at reading phonyism, and like they want authenticity now more than ever. So everything you do, it has to be in your brand toolbox. So you can't come out and tomorrow I can't be, Apple. It's just not authentic. People will pick up on it. So it does take engaging your community and sharing with them the importance of them being a part of it. So, if you ask a few parents, a few student leaders to come in and say, hey, how do we break through? How do we get folks excited to be here? A lot of folks are focused on the outcomes, and especially as a young person, every week at school, there's a lot of drudgery. I mean, the bell rings, you go to the bathroom, you go to lunch. The same with educators. There's a lot of drudgery. It's just day in, day out. But how do we inject excitement and inspiration weekly, daily, every interaction? It starts at the top, and it includes bringing other folks in. To be quite frank, we're extremely blessed to have our little piece in this. What we experience and how we're in the room when these light bulbs go off, it's magic. It really is. I'm tickled to death to be on this panel, but honestly, in every day in these meetings we have with schools and educators, it is awesome. So, and I'll go into more detail. Just ask me. Sorry, I'll go off down the squirrel trail pretty quickly.
No, that's really.
Go
ahead,
I'm
Shani.
seeing a couple of questions, and I wondered if James you may not be the person for him, but I see some questions from people. I'm putting your lawyer hat on with your community building hat, and there are a few folks who said, if a district uses the county, I'll kind of summarize. If a district uses the county court system for chronic attendance, what would the panel suggest instead? And a similar one, how can the juvenile court system partner better with the school system? We often engage with families and youth of various ages with truancy issues. So starting with James, but I'm curious if others have thoughts on those questions as well.
I think I mean, that's not really my area of the law, but I do think that, attendance and truancy, a lot of that can be solved just like how a lot of us go to work every day, right? You got a plan. So how many of us, the morning of, we're trying to figure out what we're going to wear? How many of us at the morning of trying to find shoes to wear? Right, all of us, right? So if we're able to offer, some incentives for good attendance by, saying who's going to be best dressed for the next day, or actually planning out what you're going to wear the night before, picking out your shoes, knowing where your shoes are, the night before, and getting them all together. I mean, I think about the times that I'm late for work or late for whatever. It's because I'm trying to find something to wear, trying to find the bow tie, trying to find the jacket, trying to find the shoes. Folks that are late to the workout, their number one thing is, oh man, I left my running shoes at home. Well, if you get together and you do everything the night before, proper preparation prevents a lot of issues that could happen. And so I think that could offer some incentives kind of in that piece as well.
Anticipating the needs. I hear again. That's super great. Thank you, everybody. There's so many great questions. We are going to keep track of these questions. If we don't get a chance to answer them here, we have resources that we can provide. And so we'll definitely keep track of the chat and the questions that came through. And we really appreciate that. So we are actually going to go ahead and start to talk through some tactics that have come up in this conversation. I'll start to share my screen again, but I just want the panel to know that you are free to comment on tactics as we're talking about them, as we move through them. If you've had experience with them, would love for you to chime in. So I'll just take 1 second here and begin to share my screen. You may see a little transition there. Yep, and 1 second. Right here. All right, great. So what a conversation. I really wish we had even longer to talk through these things, but we want to make sure that everyone in the audience feels like they get to walk away with some tactics. There's been a lot of great tactics that have come up. There's been a lot of conversation around tone and approach, but we want to also help you to really feel like you can step out and you have some ways to engage, remove barriers, employ these communication tactics as well. So let's talk a little bit about the things that you saw come through and the things that we might have seen come through here in this conversation. In terms of tactics for understanding barriers to attendance, we'll just repeat the quote from Attendance Works again, which is that it begins with engaging students and families. You heard James and everyone here on this panel talk about anticipating needs, talk about listening. And so we just want to leave you with a couple ideas for listening routinely, right? Which we can offer with the pulse checks and the attendance checks, as well as opportunities to ask questions along intent to enroll. Those are all things that Possip helps with. But in general, the takeaway here is know very securely that you are actively, routinely engaging, listening, and learning about those barriers and anticipating those needs. What are some tactics for removing barriers to attendance? And this is where I would welcome the panel to communicate anything if you wanted to come off mute. We'll just talk through some of the tactics that have come up today. Data shows us that sickness and transportation are the biggest barriers to attendance. And even if those are excused absences, people are still missing school. So to address sickness, we have a few ideas here. And some of those have come up from Marc Anthony and others, creating a clear guidance for parents and kids on what to do when sick. I love the fact that Napier just says, we're going to help you make that choice. We have someone on staff here that can help you make that decision. That really makes it very clear, but you can also provide other go, no go paths, right? Decision trees, ways that parents know whether or not to send their kid to school. And there's a couple examples here on the slide, a column for bringing students in and a column for keeping students home. Just an example of what we mean by a go, no go decision. In terms of keeping schools healthy, also communicate about it. And this is something Austin might have something to offer, but we recommend highlighting your health protocols and policies. We recommend sharing your stats. I know we have a school here, Hillwood, that does a great job with that, letting people know sickness stats and things like that. Update families on your efforts to have a healthy environment. And also know that parents get excited about really simple things. When we talk about the tone and we talk about those encouraging things, they're very real. So things that parents comment on in the pulse checks would be putting plants in a classroom, having windows open, increasing outdoor time. Those softer things do really change what an environment feels like for a person and the kind of tone that you get to carry forward. And then to address transportation barriers, we've heard schools be successful in things like Napier's walking school bus. There are other schools in the country doing walking school buses and finding success with it. We also know that wider windows of time for drop off and pickup have been very helpful in giving more flexibility in schedules. And we know that families ask for extracurricular activities and after school programs that give them more flexibility in schedules, but also motivate students to go to school. Finally, I'll comment on a couple other tactics for removing barriers. You can help families create support networks. So we think about James's capital steps. I would bet people that attend those look out for whether their friends are joining and encourage each other to come. I know it works that way in my own life. So you can encourage families to have a support network, people that are near their bus stop or they live close to, that they can create a phone tree for. And that's an activity that can be done at a school event. Sometimes communities or schools are engaging organizations like churches to help kids get to school. And we know that our data has shown us that families are seeking support people and mentors for their students. Finally, make plans in advance. Help families make plans in advance. That can be done through calendaring and reinforcing calendars throughout the year, and as well as just making it clear to people realistic times that they can engage with the school. If they want to come in, if they need to talk, if they need to address a barrier together, make that really obvious, your availability to them. So I'll pause for a minute. Do our panelists want to add any tactics? This is a big area of ideas.
Yeah, I'll jump in. One thing that stood out to me that you mentioned was having a good support system and a good network. I mean, I think that is critical for success, especially for removing barriers. You know, if you have someone who is, you know, apprehensive about coming, or you have a student that doesn't necessarily know whether or not they should participate in this, but if you're able to create a culture where there's culture of encouragement, there's culture of support, then those barriers become stepping stones on the way to their success. And so I do think that if you can remove those barriers by having a strong support system.
Thank you. Yes, that's very important. And that's definitely been a theme of today. Anything else that folks on the panel would like to add regarding health or transportation barriers or some of these tactics?
I just think, you know, part of what you were talking about is just creating the space for some of those things that we kind of expect people to take care of. So at back to school night, or just like when you have an attentive group, even at like, you know, a game or a play where people come to, really having the resources and places where people can start to think about things that they may not, they don't have the space to think about because they're used to kind of triaging. And so I think giving them that proactive space where they can stop and reflect and think and plan is super important.
Yeah.
Also, oh,
Go ahead, Mark, Anthony.
Okay, something that's been very helpful for Napier is our intentional partnerships. So the walking school bus is a very successful initiative, but it would not be successful without Walk Bike Nashville. We've partnered with organizations not only in regards to transportation, but also in regards to health, also in regards to meeting the family's basic needs at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of basic needs. We've made intentional partnerships that specifically address those barriers that we're finding in regards to attendance, as well as in regards to achievement, because we're finding that they're all intertwined, they're all interconnected. So just being very intentional about the partnerships that you are pursuing to come into the school to be able to help you to bolster the programs that you have, as well as the achievement of the students, is really important when it comes to student success.
That's super great. Austin, I think I heard you chime in as well.
Yeah, something that we've seen is interesting is as schools get larger, communities get larger, sometimes we forget about really telling the stories of the successes of some of the past students who've come through. So, going back to that statement earlier about the drudgery, there's students that came to that school 10 years ago, and, the definition of success is complicated. But let's just say there's 6 different buckets of success. Let's find some of those great stories and really preach them from the mountaintop. The youth need them. You watch the news, it's a lot of negativity. So we need to just flood the airwaves with positive stories and really impactful stories that these kids can resonate and say, hey, that individual looks like me, is from the same neighborhood I was from, went to the same school. Wow, they live 3 states away doing something really cool. What did that individual do? How do I do what they did? So yeah, it's
I love that. Yeah, do Austin, either you or maybe Marc or Dr. Seay, do any of you have a success story that you tell again and again?
There's so many of them. I mean, it's really endless. Like every community has these folks who grew up with cousins taking care of them, who are now attorney generals in another state, or who are doctors, or who are leading, a Teach for America campaign in an impoverished area. So like there's tons of these stories. Sometimes if you pause and try to find the really impactful, heart-wrenching, tear-jerking stories, I mean, that's what you watch on ESPN. So that's what folks want to see.
So I'd like to give a soft pitch, right? Somebody in the chat highlighted it, and I'd like to go ahead and highlight it as well. Dr. Seay is an example of a story of success that came from challenging times and a challenging background. And now I get the joy of calling him Dr. Seay. So Dr. Seay, if you could maybe share with us about your success story.
Yeah, so I always share with my students, I always tell my story, right? So that's how I start off with my relationship building with my students and families. And so just really talking about coming from an impoverished neighborhood and not really having the role models in my family that really pushed me to want to be at school. And so I had teachers around me, like my 4th grade teacher, right? I think I grew up, and at first I think I wanted to be a firefighter. Then I played football. And so then when I got into 4th grade, my teacher, 4th grade teacher, really inspired me to want to go into education, because there is where the mindset of really inspiring people to dream beyond what their current situation is. And so I tell my students always, I'm a dreamer, and that they are dreamers, and that dream that is in their mind, just sticking to it and being consistent with it, even when there's no one there rooting you on or pushing you to go. Push yourself and know that, it's coming. And so I show that, and I tell that to my students, and they are amazed. I think I've been a teacher in education now for 7 years. And throughout those 7 years, I've shown the dreamers mindset and that consistency mindset with my students at the same time. And so I've got my master's, and I just recently completed my doctoral degree. And so that was one of those big challenging steps that my students all of my students are inspired by, because they know that, hey, if I keep dreaming, I know that I can accomplish what I need to do. So
I love
That's
that.
awesome.
And oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I don't want to. We have 1 minute left, and so
Yeah, it takes us into the closing. That's actually a great way of just showing us how to share that mindset, how to tell those stories. So we really appreciate that. And then we know that building that culture of attendance, the way that you all are doing in schools, the way that James is doing in his community workout programs, it is asking those important questions. What does a student have to look forward to each day? What is worth showing up for? What might they miss? And how will they be missed? So thank you so much for sharing that example of the long-term benefits of showing up. And also a great example of how to stay aligned, which is sharing that key data and those stories about attendance, aligning, about all the important areas of how it impacts your life, extracurricular, academic, social ties, and of course, just continue to track that data, continue to tell those stories. That's just closing out some of our tactics here. So we really thank you all so much for being here. I wanted to squeeze those last minutes out of the panel and appreciate you sticking around. In wrapping up here, just to remind you that chronic absences are a solvable problem. We have a lot of dreamers on this panel today, and that kind of mindset is helping us get there. So even though it can seem insurmountable, our partnerships with local schools have helped them increase attendance efforts from 1% to 3% by engaging families and intervening early. So we are here to help with that, and we want to help with that. We thank you. And know that you're going to be getting an email with resources from us, as well as ways to connect to the panelists on LinkedIn and otherwise, so you can learn from them more. And we also will give you the opportunity to, of course, learn more about pulse checks and attendance checks. So watch for that email, watch for future events. Thank you for making this one so great. And thank you to our beautiful panel. We really appreciate you. And with that, we will begin to sign off and say our goodbyes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. James, thank you for being here. Dr. Seay, Mark Anthony, and Austin, you guys are awesome. I wanted to ask you a million more questions, but I really appreciate your generosity of time and all the inspiration you brought. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice meeting y'all.
Nice to
See you
meet
later.
you. Take care.
Bye. God
I'll
bless.
be in touch soon. Bye.